Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk. Today's guest is Steven Tekulski. Steve is serving his third term as a justice in the town of East Hampton, but he didn't grow up on the East End. And I'm really interested in finding out where he was born and how he ended up here serving the residents of East Hampton. So Steve, thank you for joining me today. Let's have a talk.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. The first two pictures I have, I think, are generational, maybe? Tell me about these.
They are. That's my mother and father getting married.
Okay.
And those are my maternal grandparents. My dad died when I was 2 years old. I was born in Brooklyn. My dad died when I was 2, and my mother never remarried. And so when we were 4, we moved to Stamford, Connecticut, where my grandfather was the general manager of 3 movie theaters. And so I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, which back then was very much like East Hampton probably was at the same time, a small town. But of course it changed dramatically.
So you lived with your grandparents, and you don't really remember your dad.
I don't at all. There are no pictures of me as a baby with my father. I have seen old home movies of him, and we walk exactly the same. We stand exactly the same, we walk exactly the same. And he was a little taller. He was 6 feet, but 130 pounds. I mean, I got my body and my metabolism from him, for which I'm grateful.
Well, I love the top hat, right? Wearing a top hat in the wedding.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And no siblings.
I have an
you
older
do?
sister.
Okay.
She's 4 years older. There are pictures of her with my father, and she was 6 when he died, so she does have memories of him.
Okay. Okay, so now you're in Stamford, Connecticut, and your grandfather's working for TV stations, radio stations?
So he ran
Oh,
3
movie
movie
theaters.
theaters in town, and the one where his office was, the Palace Theater, was also a legitimate theater where there were shows. And so the Mickey Mouse Club came to do a show one year, and we got to have lunch with Jimmy Dodd and the Mouseketeers. I wish I had the picture of Annette Funicello kissing me on the cheek.
I'm sure you do. And that's you in the picture
That
with
is me,
Jimmy
with a bow
Dodd.
tie, even then.
With the
Although
bow tie,
I didn't tie him by hand at that point.
Very nice looking. And how about you with the guitar? You were playing guitar at that age. This is pretty young.
I was 8 years old then. Actually, that's my grandfather in the background. I don't know where that picture was taken. That looks like somebody's house. We lived in apartments my entire life. In fact, the house I live on now in Cedar Street is the first house I've ever lived in. So I started playing guitar when I was 8, which is a little embarrassing because I should be a better guitarist than I am. But I haven't played straight through all those years.
Yeah, that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
Most people don't, spend a lot of time until they have time later in their life to really take up something like that that's a hobby. So tell me about growing up in Stamford. What else?
Well, Stamford, like I said, was a very small town, and as I got older, I started working in the movie. Well, as a kid, I would go to the movies all the time. Of course, didn't have to pay, and I can remember being chased by my mother because I was 4 or 5 years old and I was running up and down the aisles when I wasn't supposed to be. And as I got older, as a teenager, I would go to an 8 o'clock show at one of the theaters and then a 10 o'clock show at another. And in those days, there were no multiplexes, and movies played as long as they were popular.
Right.
And we got so when a movie came out, it would play in New York City and it would play in Stamford. And so we got big crowds from Westchester County.
Oh.
And, I saw West Side Story 10,000 times because it played for months and months or in the heat of the night. I love the movies. And then when I was old enough, I think at 12 you could be an usher. So I started working as an usher, but my grandfather didn't want me to work for him. So there was a chain of 2 other theaters that he was friendly with. So I started working out at those theaters. And then as I got much older, when I was in college, I worked as a relief manager in the summers so the managers could take a break. And yeah, it was cool. My grandfather would stay up late watching the Academy Awards because, we had the big the front of the movie theater, they would change the lettering on it, and if it was an Academy Award winner, that would be up there. And I can remember my grandfather worrying that when movie tickets went from $1.75 to $2, that nobody would ever pay to go to the movies again. He's no doubt turning over in his grave at the cost of movies today. And I met a lot of famous people because even though tickets were $1.50 or $1.75, everybody wanted to get into the movies for free. Paul Newman would come from Westport. Jackie Robinson lived in Stamford. He would come in. I got to meet him. He was actually my high school graduation speaker from Stamford High School in 1970.
And you never got a ball signed or
no.
Huh. That must have been interesting.
Yeah, it was a great town to grow up in. We always lived in garden apartments, big complexes, but you could, for Halloween, you could go out by yourself and you were safe. Nobody had to worry about you.
Yeah.
And so, it was a nice place to grow up in.
So it was a lot like growing up in East Hampton.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
So, did you play baseball? This is your son, right?
Yeah, that's my son.
But did you play baseball?
I played basketball. I was a basketball. That was my primary sport. I mean, I played softball too, but I played basketball. And in fact, I went to Mitchell. I was a terrible high school student. This should be a lesson to everybody out there. High school was, elementary school was kindergarten through 6th grade. Junior high was 7th through 9th, and high school was 10th through 12th. And in 3 years of high school, I was probably absent about a year, and I was only sick for 2 weeks. Fortunately, my senior year, I had to have my appendix out, and all my teachers were very gracious in letting me make all the work that I hadn't done in the previous 3 years. And I really barely graduated. I was always in the top groups. I tested well. I wasn't interested, and I didn't go. And I had a terrible guidance counselor who recommended these ridiculous colleges for me in the middle of Kentucky or something. And my mother found Mitchell College, which was a junior college at the time in New London, it's now a 4-year school. Saw it for the first time when I went there, and realized as soon as I got there that maybe I should start paying attention to my grades. And so I did from that point onward. Played basketball there for 2 years. Then I transferred to Elmira College, upstate New York. I played basketball there my junior year. I took my senior year off because even at that level, we weren't always home for Thanksgiving because there were tournaments, we weren't always home for Christmas. And I was pretty sure I was going to go to law school or graduate school of some kind, so I figured I would try to have a little less basketball time and a little more time to myself.
So what brought you to East Hampton? How'd you end up in East Hampton?
So after Elmira, I took 6 months off, and I went to St. John's Law School. I started in February. Excuse me, I did it in 2.5 years. And my first job out of law school was as an assistant DA in Manhattan, which was a great job. And I lived in Queens, where I had lived a number of different places in Queens when I went to St. John's. And then when Stephanie and I got together, we lived in the city on 17th between 1st and 2nd, a rental. And I had known her before that, and she had always come out here, and I had not. I came out one summer, liked it, and she had already been thinking about buying a house. And so then we bought a house for $99,000 on Cedar Street. Didn't think we could afford it.
What year was that?
It had to be 85, maybe 86. Interest rates were 13 or 14%. I wish I'd bought 10 of them.
I know.
But it was always going to be a retirement home. And then we used to come out every weekend all year round when that was not a thing. It was literally Memorial Day to Labor Day. And there was nobody, or Christmas time, Thanksgiving, and there was nobody. And we had a little escort, and we packed up my son. We had 2 dogs by the time he was a year old. And we realized that as he got older, we wouldn't be able to come out every weekend because he'd have friends in the city, he'd have parties, he'd have school, and then private school versus public school. So we decided to move out here. At the time, I'd left the DA's office. I was a partner in a law firm that defended doctors and hospitals in medical malpractice cases, all trial work. And Stephanie was an accessory designer. She designed hats and belts, gloves. She sold to Saks and other big stores in the city. She could do it from anywhere. I had no idea what I was going to do. I would have banged nails or painted houses if I had to. But when I announced that I was leaving, and I wasn't stealing cases. That was common for an attorney to go from one firm to the other and steal clients. I wasn't doing that. They kept me off counsel. So I tried a lot of cases in Suffolk County the first couple of years I was out here that really, paid the mortgage. And then I slowly developed, my own local practice. I did a lot of bartering. I got my lawn mowed for, in exchange for legal services. I set up a little office in my basement, and I was always going to put a shingle out and then get an office with an assistant. Yeah, my office is still in the basement. There's no shingle. Nobody works for me, and I'm proud to say I've built up a pretty good practice over the years.
And then I have two pictures of your kids. We saw the one with Alex in Little League, and then... Yep,
that was before Alex started. But I coached Little League for 10 years, in many ways the worst 10 years of my life. I started when he was young, and my last year was his last year. So that was, in that picture, he's not Little League age yet. And then when Alexander was 11 or so, he decided he wanted to go snowboarding. Now, I had never skied in my life, but I thought it would be a good idea to start snowboarding too. The most painful day in my life. I spent the entire day falling down the mountain. We would go to Okemo every February break. Now, Kylie, who's 3 years younger, she didn't snowboard at first. Stephanie had skied as a kid. She grew up in Michigan, but she didn't like it. And she and Kylie would go cross-country skiing. And then we convinced Kylie to go snowboarding with us, and then Stephanie became a snowshoer. She'd be snowshoeing up the mountain as we were gliding down it.
So if Stephanie grew up in Michigan, how did you meet?
In the city. She had lived in the city for a number of years.
Well, that was nice.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so now you're out in East Hampton. You're establishing your own practice. And what is this about?
Well, fortunately, that's a bonfire and not a house fire that I'm standing in front of. One of the kids that I coached in Little League, his father and grandfather were in the fire department. And his grandfather died, Griff Collins, during the time that I was coaching. And I went to the funeral, and I was so impressed with, the display of the firemen in their uniforms. And Stamford had a paid department, so I was not exposed to volunteer fire departments. So then I joined. I think it'll be 35 years this year that I've been in the fire department.
I think that's where I first met you.
Probably.
Was in the fire, when you were in the fire department and I was in the ambulance, and that's where you got your nickname, Killer?
Yes, I got my nickname from the fire department that I'm very grateful for, because the fire department gives out some nicknames that are not always so pleasant.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to have them written on your helmet like that.
No.
But this one's not bad.
Yeah, that one's okay.
That's a great picture. I really love that picture.
I have to say, besides my kids and grandchildren, serving in the fire department has been a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah.
My son was in for a while. He took a leave when he moved to his house in Springs. Hopefully he'll get back in one day. But there was a time when he was an officer when I was in, and that was cool. And we went into fires together.
And you worked your way up in the ranks as well.
Yeah, I was a chief from 2003 to 2005, which it's very honored, because I'm not from here.
Right.
And the fire department remains, it's less so now, but 35 years ago, it was really very much a local, rural group of guys and women, and a great group. And it's an honor to be part of them.
No, I know the feeling. I loved being in EMS service as well.
I know you did.
Tell me about this.
So I bought a motorcycle for the first time when I was 40 years old. I had a friend of mine, Chris Tracy, had bought a small motorcycle, and we were friends with him. They lived on McGurk Street. And he asked me if I wanted to take it for a ride. And I understood how to ride it, and I rode it around the block, and I put it on a kickstand. I walked away, and my wife said, I hope you don't think you're getting one of them. Well, the next day I bought Bobby Mott's motorcycle, a big Yamaha that was for sale. And I rode, not as much as I do now, but I rode until I was 52. I had my hip replaced when I was 52. And the bike that I had at the time, not a Harley, was very tall. I have pretty long legs, but I was on my toes with it. And once I had my hip replaced, I felt a little unsteady. So I rode less and less over the years. And then about 8 years ago, a friend of mine had a Harley that he asked me to ride. And I could put my feet flat on the ground, and then I ended up buying that bike used, but that's a 2002.
That's a big bike.
That is a big bike. That's a firefighter special. That came out after 9/11. Harley built like 16,000 of them. They were sold only to firefighters. It's got all kinds of firefighter regalia on it, and I've added a lot to it. And for the last 6 out of 7 years, I've had it trailered down to Daytona for Bike Week. The first year, I stayed in New Smyrna, where Larry Cantwell, at the time, rented a house. He now has a house there. But the last 5 years, I've stayed in St. Augustine, which is a great little town. It's about 50 miles from Daytona. And I ride back and forth, and there are some people from East Hampton that live down there now.
Oh, nice.
Scott Fithian's in Daytona. Kenny Westberg's in Micanopy, which is right below Gainesville. So, you know, Bobby Mott and Kim, they're down there. So
you have a little reunion.
So for Bike Week, yeah. And then quite a few people from here go down. That's on A1A. There's on all throughout Daytona, there are photographers from different companies that just take pictures of every motorcycle that goes by, and then you remember what time and what day you went, and you look and you pick, and that's one of those
photos. And that's how you got that. I used to love that TV show. I don't remember what it's called now, about the father and son and the motorcycles. What was that? It was on TLC or one of those channels. I can't remember it now, but they customized motorcycles.
Oh, Orange County.
Orange County Choppers. That's the one. Yeah, I used to love watching that.
Me too.
It's a fascinating show. Okay, and here you are with not your guitar, but
That's a lap steel guitar.
but is this your guitar?
That's one of them.
Okay.
I have quite a few.
And tell us what you're doing with your guitar.
So like I said, from when I was 8 till I was 12, I took classical guitar lessons. And then I played on and off over the years. Never performed in public, except once when I was about 10 years old. I was invited to try out for the Ted Mack Amateur Hour.
Yeah.
For those of us old enough to remember that. And I was nervous as could be and did not make it, but that was the only time I performed publicly. And then my mom lived in the nursing home in Southampton, where she ultimately passed away a number of years ago. And Joe Potter, his father had been there. And Job's a fine musician. And before the pandemic, they would pay Wednesdays 3 different performers to play for 3 different wards there. And all of the wards, including, you know, the Alzheimer's ward, loved music.
Of course.
And my mother, being my mother, knew Job and knew that Job knew me, and said to him one time, "My son is an excellent guitarist," which is not true, but that's what mothers say.
I think you're pretty
And
good.
so Job said to me, "Look, why don't you come one time and surprise your mother? You know, you can play the guitar and you can sing a song or two." And I resisted for about a year. And then one Christmas, probably at this point, maybe 8 years ago, I did. I played with him and Dick Johansson, and I got the bug. Then Job and I played there regularly. Started doing some open mics, and then Job formed a 5-piece band, the Potter Tekulski band, and we played the Talk House, played the Clubhouse. You know, people paid us to play. And then a couple of years ago, Job decided that it's a lot of work with a 5-piece band. So he formed a smaller group, and then I formed the Steven Tekulski band, and that's That's what that picture is from. And we've been together 3 or 4 years. Play the Talk House a couple of times a year, which is a real treat.
And who are your bandmates?
So Jeffrey Levitt and Anthony Liberatore are 2 lead guitarists. Chris Mijos is a drummer, and Rob Florio is a bass player. And I'm the lead singer and play the acoustic electric guitar. And I play a lot of vintage country songs. And then when I'm not playing, when Anthony is singing or Jeff is singing, I play the lap steel guitar, which is a real twangy. That I taught myself to play about 10 years ago.
Well, it gives me hope because, you know, I come from a family full of performers, and my 2 sons are both very good guitar players, and neither one of them will perform publicly. So maybe someday there's hope.
I'll tell you, I mean, I still get nervous right before, but it's really encouraging that people will pay for you to play. And
it's
people
pretty
will
great.
People come to listen to you.
That's pretty great.
So it's been very cool. We had a very busy summer. Played at a few different places this year, and looking forward to another busy summer next year.
That's great. Okay, let's talk about this picture.
Yeah, so
That's your mother. I know your mother. I remember your mother because she came to all the Little League games when our boys were both in Little League, and she would be sitting in her chair, which you dutifully brought for her to sit in.
Yeah. My mom moved to so she lived in Stamford with her mother. So on my mother's on my father's side, my genes are not so good, but on my mother's side, my mother's mother lived to 100 and was sharp really until the very end. And my mom died she was 93. She was almost 94, and she had some dementia at the end. But after her mother died, she lived alone in right outside of Stamford in Springdale for a year or so, and then she moved out here. Originally, she lived in an apartment above Sam's, and then moved to Windmill Village 2. And that's when I was sworn in for the first time as a judge. Well, now it's 10 years ago. She was in the nursing home for a short period of time at that time. So we paid for a van and an aid for someone. And
oh, she must have been thrilled.
She was, yes, she was
she must
thrilled.
have been so excited to see you.
Yeah, that was a proud day.
And you have your robes on, so.
Yep, I had just gotten sworn in. Larry Cantwell swore me in that day.
Very special.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have these 2 special guys right here.
The next generation. Yeah, so Alexander married Nicole from Montauk probably 10 years ago. And then gave me these 2 wonderful grandchildren. Piper is, that was her first day of 2nd grade. They live in Springs. She goes to Springs School. So she'll be 8 in January. And Parker turned 3 in September. Piper named Parker. Alexander was going to name him Alexander. They knew they were having a boy. They didn't know with Piper. They knew they were having a boy, and he was going to name him Alexander. Give him he wasn't going to be a junior, but he was going to be a different middle name. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I think kids should have their own names." And they were at a big parking lot in Rhode Island visiting a friend, and Piper said, "What about the name Parker?" And she persisted, and to their credit, they named him Parker.
That's a great name.
Yeah, it's a cool name, and it, when he's old enough to understand it, I mean, they have a very strong bond between them, and I think it will be even stronger.
And of course, I love Piper because I have my own Piper.
I know you do.
So, she's actually going to be in high school in another year.
Wow.
You can believe it. They grow up so fast.
I know it.
Gosh.
And like I told you, my son and daughter-in-law were kind enough to take me as their guest to Disney World for 5
it's exhausting, right?
fun-filled days.
You realize how old you are when you go to Disney World with your grandkids.
Well, one thing, so I used to bring my kids every April break. We would go to Disney World. It was much different then. We stayed at the Grand Floridian when I could not afford it.
Right.
Alexander and I would play golf every morning, first thing. And there were days that we just hung out at the hotel pool. And then, we'd go to Epcot for dinner, or we'd go to Magic Kingdom. Now, you have to reserve what day you're going to go to the park. You have to reserve almost everything.
I know. It's not as much fun as it used to be.
Well, I'll tell you, I wasn't sure I'd still like roller coasters, but I did,
Mhm.
and I went on them with my granddaughter, which was cool. But there are as many wheelchairs and
Oh,
scooters
yes.
as there are strollers, which is amazing. And so many, people my age and older that are there by themselves. I mean,
Yeah,
I love Disney, but yeah, if I'm going, I'm taking my kids or my
right.
grandkids. I'm
It's
not
all
going
about
by
kids.
myself, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great place to go with the kids. I mean, we've taken all our grandkids, and I love going with them, but it is
Oh,
exhausting. I
absolutely.
climb into bed every night and
Me too.
dead to the world for at
Yeah,
least
yeah. We got
7
back
hours.
1 o'clock Wednesday morning. Yesterday was a long day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what else is in the future for you?
Well, I don't know. I have 2 more years on this term.
Hmm.
I would like to run again in 2 years. Still practicing law. We're allowed to practice as long as it's not in conflict with being a judge. So 99% of my practice is real estate, which is dead at the moment. And continue playing music and riding my motorcycle.
Nice. My great uncle, the house that I live in, he built that house, and he was a justice in East Hampton town. And when I first moved into that house, some couple stopped me on the street one day. They were an older couple. I didn't know them. They said, "You're living in the house that we got married in," because he would do weddings.
Oh, in the house?
In his
Yeah.
house occasionally, apparently, because they said they got married in the living room of that house.
Well, that's
So,
pretty cool.
yeah.
That's one of the things about being a judge that you don't realize when you become one is that you do weddings, and I
Yeah.
do a ton of weddings.
You did.
And I see people all the time. I saw a guy recently, he said, "You remember you married me about 10 years ago?" I said,
No.
no, but that's great. I hope he says, "No, we haven't been together for 8." So, but, we have a very large Spanish-speaking population.
Sure.
And I know enough Spanish to do them in Spanish.
Nice.
So that's a treat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, and you did my grandson's
Yes,
almost a year ago.
yeah.
January.
The only time I was nervous about doing it is because when I ask them if they do, they say yes, and when I tell them to kiss, they kiss. So I know that they understand at least that. But Rico, who's the chef at Blue Parrot, got married a couple of years ago and had closed the restaurant and invited friends. And my daughter and her boyfriend were friends. And my daughter's fluent in Spanish. She's a dual language instructor in math. And did the ceremony. And then I said to her, "How did I do?" She said, "Well, you mispronounced this word and you mispronounced that word. But otherwise it was okay."
Well, my final question for you is my homage to James Lipton from Inside the Actors Studio. I don't know if you ever watched.
I did.
I used to love that show.
Yeah.
And he asked the questions at the end. I only ask one, and that is, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get to the pearly gates?
We've been waiting for you.
Long time, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Okay. Well, I really want to thank Steven Tekulski for joining us today and for sharing his life story with us. Steve is just the kind of person we love to see migrate out to the East End, making it their permanent home because he contributes in so many ways to the quality of our life here. I also want to thank our sponsor, Marshall and Sterling Insurance of East Hampton, for underwriting the program, and my thanks to the entire staff at LTV for all they do to promote local broadcasting here in East Hampton. Please tune in again so I can introduce you to another interesting person who just might live in your neighborhood.